You are standing in a museum, looking at a piece of metal pulled from a coal seam that is 300,000 years old. It should not exist. Coal takes millions of years to form. Humans have only been capable of forging metal for a few thousand. And yet, here it is, embedded in rock that predates every known civilization. Someone or something made this, long before we were supposed to know how. This is not an isolated case. Around the world, buried in ice, sealed in stone, hidden under oceans, there are objects and structures that refuse to fit the timeline we've been taught. Historians call them anomalies. Some call them mistakes. But mistakes don't usually show up in matching sets on different continents made by people who never met. Today, you're going to look at 10 of them. Not myths, not legends. Documented, physically real, sitting in museum drawers and excavation sites right now. And by the end, you'll understand why some scientists have quietly stopped calling them unexplained and started calling them inconvenient. Let's start underwater. Off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, divers found a stone structure in 1986. Stepped terraces, straight edges, a shape that looks unmistakably like a ceremonial platform. The problem is depth. It sits nearly 75 feet below the surface. For it to have been built by hand, sea levels would have needed to be dramatically lower, which they were, around 10,000 years ago. But 10,000 years ago, according to the standard model of civilization, humans were still hunter-gatherers. No cities, no stonework, no tools capable of this kind of precision. Geologist Masaki Kimura spent decades studying the site. He argued the right angles and flat terraces are too regular to be natural erosion. Other geologists disagree, insisting the rock simply fractures this way. Here's the strange part. Nobody has definitively settled it. The debate itself tells you something. When a formation makes trained scientists argue for 30 years about whether it's man-made, you're not looking at a simple rock. Now go north into the Baltic Sea, where sonar operators in 2011 picked up something enormous resting on the seafloor, 60 meters wide. A shape some compared to the Millennium Falcon, only made of solid rock, sitting where no rock formation should naturally be. Explorer Peter Lindbergh funded expeditions to map it. Sonar showed staircase-like structures, debris fields around the base. No conclusive answer has ever been published. You're noticing a pattern already. Water keeps hiding things, which makes sense. Water erases evidence, buries civilizations, swallows coastlines. If something existed before written history, the ocean is exactly where it would be. Let's go from stone to metal. In 1938, an archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig was examining artifacts in a Baghdad museum when he noticed something odd about a small clay jar. Inside was a copper cylinder. Inside that, an iron rod. When later replicated and filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar, the object produced a small electric charge. Less than 2 volts. Enough to plate metal or mildly shock a curious finger. Historians call it the Baghdad battery. Nobody agrees on what it was actually for. Some think it stored sacred scrolls. Some think it really was used for electroplating jewelry. But the fact remains, 2,000 years before Alessandro Volta invented the modern battery, someone built a working electrochemical cell. Maybe by accident, maybe not. Then there's the Antikythera mechanism, pulled from a Greek shipwreck in 1901. For decades it sat in a museum, corroded, dismissed as scrap. Then, in the 2000s, researchers used X-ray tomography to look inside the corrosion. What they found stunned the field of archaeology. 30 interlocking bronze gears. A mechanical computer, built around 100 BCE, capable of predicting eclipses and tracking planetary movement with startling accuracy. Physicist Derek de Solla Price spent years studying it and called it unlike anything else surviving from antiquity. Nothing of similar complexity appears again in the historical record for over 1,000 years. It's as if someone invented calculus, wrote it down once, and then the instructions were lost. Doesn't that bother you a little? That a civilization built something this advanced and it simply vanished. No successor, no upgrade, just silence for 1,000 years. Think about what that really means. Somewhere in the ancient Mediterranean, a workshop existed that understood gear ratios well enough to model the irregular orbit of the moon. That knowledge required observation, mathematics, and metallurgy working together at a level historians assumed didn't arrive until the Renaissance. And then it stopped. One shipwreck and an entire branch of human ingenuity sank with it, undiscovered for 2,000 years. If that ship hadn't gone down near Antikythera, if a sponge diver hadn't stumbled onto the wreck by accident in 1900, you would have no idea any of it ever existed. How many other ships never got found? Now step onto land, into the mountains of Peru, where stones at Sacsayhuaman fit together so precisely you cannot slide a blade between them. No mortar. Blocks weighing over 100 tons, some with 12 or more angled faces, interlocked like a puzzle designed by someone with modern engineering knowledge and ancient tools. Conventional theory says bronze chisels and immense manpower. Possible. But experimental archaeologists who have tried to replicate similar joints with period tools report it takes exponentially longer than the timeline allows for. Halfway across the world, the same style of megalithic stonework appears in ancient Egypt, in the Osirian at Abydos. Massive granite blocks, precisely cut, using techniques that Egyptologists still debate. Different continents. No contact between these cultures. Same impossible precision. Coincidence happens once, maybe twice. When you're staring at 10 of them, you start asking a different question. Consider Puma Punku in Bolivia, sitting over 12,000 feet above sea level. The site is scattered with andesite blocks cut with interlocking notches so uniform they look machine-milled, not hand-carved. Archaeologist Alexei Vranich has spent years mapping the site using laser scanning, trying to reconstruct how the original structure might have looked before centuries of looters and earthquakes scattered the stones. His work suggests the builders used sophisticated modular construction, blocks designed to interlock like standardized parts, thousands of years before anyone else on the planet was thinking in those terms. Standardized parts imply a system, a workshop, a set of specifications passed between builders. That's not a lucky accident. That's engineering culture. And yet, almost nothing else survives to tell you who ran it. Let's talk about metal that shouldn't exist yet. In 1912, workers shoveling coal in Oklahoma found a small iron pot lodged inside a chunk of coal estimated to be around 300 million years old. The coal had formed around it, meaning the object was there before the coal solidified. Skeptics argue contamination, a mistake in dating, or a hoax. But similar out-of-place metal objects have turned up in coal seams in multiple countries, cataloged by geologists who have no explanation beyond anomalous. Then there's the Dorchester pot, a metal vase blasted out of solid rock in Massachusetts in 1852, described at the time in Scientific American, decorated with inlaid silver flowers. The rock it came from was dated to over 500 million years old. Multicellular life had barely begun. There were no hands to make it. You start to notice something about how these stories are treated. They rarely get investigated seriously. They get filed, forgotten, moved to a drawer. Because if even one of them is real, the entire timeline of human technological development needs to be rewritten, and most institutions built their careers on the existing timeline. Let's go bigger, literally. Beneath the ruins of Baalbek in Lebanon lies the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, a single quarried block weighing an estimated 1,000 tons. Nearby, another block, discovered more recently, is estimated at closer to 1,650 tons. To this day, no crane on Earth can lift that in one piece. Archaeologists agree the Romans built temples on top of this platform. Nobody agrees on who quarried and moved these specific foundation stones, or exactly how, given the tools available at the time. Anthropologist Jean-Pierre Adam attempted to calculate the manpower required using period-appropriate methods, and the numbers required tens of thousands of workers pulling in perfect coordination, an operation almost impossible to execute successfully with ropes and wooden rollers alone at that scale. Maybe they solved a problem we haven't figured out how to solve without electricity. Maybe knowledge existed once that never made it into the books that survived. There's one more stop worth making, back in Egypt at the Great Pyramid itself. Not the pyramid you're picturing. The internal shafts, narrow channels running from the king's chamber toward the outer surface, too small for a person to crawl through. In the 1990s, a robotics engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small robot up one of these shafts and found it sealed by a stone door, complete with 2 copper handles, still fitted in place after roughly 4,000 years. Nobody has ever definitively explained what's behind it, or why a shaft aimed with near-perfect precision at a specific star would need a locked door with handles nobody was meant to use again. Every few years, a new scan reignites the same debate, and every few years, it goes unresolved again. Because that's the real theme running through every one of these 10 discoveries. Not aliens, not magic. Something simpler and stranger. Loss. Civilizations rise, and sometimes they don't get to pass down what they knew. Fire, flood, war, time. It only takes one bad century to erase 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge, and history has had plenty of bad centuries. Think about how much of what you know depends on things being written down and preserved. Your operating manuals, your medical knowledge, your engineering standards. If your civilization vanished tomorrow, how much of it would survive 10,000 years underwater, or buried under a mudslide, or lost when the last person who understood it died without teaching anyone else? You've now walked through 10 of them. A stepped platform under the Pacific, a mystery shape under the Baltic, a jar that generates electricity, a bronze computer that predicted eclipses, interlocking stones no blade can slip between, modular blocks cut like machine parts high in the Andes, metal pulled from coal older than the dinosaurs, a vase blasted out of half-billion-year-old rock, stones heavier than anything modern cranes can lift, and a locked door 4,000 years old that no one has ever fully opened. 10 separate puzzles, 10 separate continents and centuries, all pointing at the same uncomfortable gap in the story you were taught. That's what these 10 discoveries are actually telling you. Not a story about ancient aliens, a warning about fragility. Knowledge is not permanent just because it feels permanent to you right now. It is only ever one gap away from disappearing completely, the way it seems to have disappeared before. So the next time someone says ancient people couldn't have known that, ask yourself a different question. Not whether they could have known it. Ask whether we'd even recognize the proof if it was still sitting there, waiting in a museum drawer 300 million years deep in a piece of coal.